So I like to complain about my job a little bit. It's a human thing, it's what we do. No matter how much we really enjoy what we do for a living, no matter how privileged we are to do it, and occasionally in exchange for a decent living wage, it's work, right? They have to pay us for us to go do that stuff. So complaining about work, it's kind of a thing that we do, even if we don't really mean it. Well, why am I talking about it in a Warhammer 40k hobby channel? Well, a few weeks ago, I had the chance to go to Dallas for a couple of nights. Did a little bit of training for one of the major things that I have to do for a living. But as has become my custom when I travel, I stopped by a friendly local game store. This one was called Toy Soldiers in Dallas. It was a really cool little place. Didn't have a ton of stuff on offer, but what it did have was full of charm. I mean, you know, you have the usual Warhammer 40k stuff, you have a really nice selection of paints, but more than anything, there's gaming tables in the back, and there's all these kind of like display cases with other people's sometimes really well painted miniatures kind of on display, maybe for sale. I don't know. I wasn't interested in that. But it's one of the really nice perks of my job. You know, I get to travel. Well, okay, I have to travel, and it's almost always you're going to go in there into a hotel conference room and you're going to sit there studying for, 8 hours out of the day. But when that day's over, I get to go drive around a new city, a place I've maybe never been before, or maybe a place that I've been several times and I'm getting more comfortable in. Anyway, that's what happened with this project. While I was at Toy Soldiers talking to the really neat lady who was helping me out, I picked up a box of these guys, the Aeldari Dire Avengers. They are a cool looking kind of variation on your standard Aeldari warrior. Not, fantastic at anything except apparently at Overwatch shooting, which is, okay, kind of cool. So, for this video, I'll talk a little bit about how I painted them and then compare them to old Dire Avenger models I have lying around from many years ago to see how they stack up. Join me, will you? Okay, so here's the thing. There's a soft spot in my heart for Aeldari. I don't know what it is. For sure, they were my very first army. When I first started Warhammer 40k back in the late 90s. It was second edition is when I first started collecting stuff. I petered off by third edition because I went to graduate school and I was broke and all kinds of stuff. But the point is, my very first army, the very first models I got were Aeldari, and I loved them. I was bad at them, and I thought I was really good at painting them. I was middling at best. So when I started my Warhammer 40k journey again a few years back, I thought about, recollecting Aeldari, but I wanted something different. So I went with like Space Marines, and then eventually went with Tau, and kind of my second favorite are Imperial Guard. But in the back of my mind, I still had this love for Aeldari. And that's where these Dire Avengers kind of came in. They were among my favorite units. Not because they were really shooty and cool like the Dark Reapers, but because they were basically really well-trained, normal Aeldari dudes. They strapped on slightly better armor. I don't know if it's any better in these rules, but back then you got an extra +1 to save or something. And yeah, they were just basically Aeldari Guardians who did a few extra push-ups every morning. And they looked pretty awesome. So, what was my approach for these? Well, kind of a combination of two different things. If you've seen any of my more recent videos, you know I'm really into dry brushing these days, especially since I've got like a dry palette and I've gotten kind of better at it and I've got decent brushes now for dry brushing. And I've kind of given up a little bit on the normal, layer painting and attempting to blend because I'm really bad at it. But dry brushing has been a pretty good technique. It gets me pretty good results pretty quickly and with minimal muss and fuss. But for these, I wanted to do kind of a hybrid approach. So what it is, I combined two things. So I started off with this guy. In my honest opinion, the best primer you can get for relatively little money. I think this cost me like $6-7. Give him a nice black prime, and this is where I deviated from my normal from what has become my normal approach. So how do I start this whole deal? Since it is going to be this hybrid approach, well, I start off with a base coat. Just lay it on like you normally would. Make sure your paints are thin. I use a nice dark blue because I wanted that dark blue to be my shadow. Unlike when you base coat with a dry brush, your shadows are going to be black. I didn't want the black shadows. I wanted the dark blue shadows. And so I went ahead and base coated all the models with this dark blue. And once that was established, I went in and hit them with a dry brush. Now, this dry brush had a slightly lighter shade of blue. It's brighter. It represents kind of the mid-tone that I want to kind of represent, that I want to cover most of the model. Once that was done, I went with an even lighter shade of blue, and I just hit it very, very liberally. This was going to be my highlights. Doing it this way with dry brushing over the normal base coat layer gives me the dry brush look, but only for the midtones and only for the highlights. So again, I get the best of both worlds, sort of. For Dire Avengers, the secondary color is apparently always white. Now, you could use whatever color you want because they're your models and no one's going to make you do whatever you don't want to do, but in this case, I wanted white. Mostly because white's a challenging color, but I think I've got the formula down, at least good enough for me. So I went in with kind of a medium gray with all those secondary color pieces. In this case, the helmet and the weapon. Again, using a very nicely thinned medium gray, I made sure to coat all of these. I gave them kind of 2 coats to make sure that all those brush marks, kind of went away. Over this, I hit it with a dry brush, once it dried obviously, with a dry brush of actual pure white. That gave me kind of the highlights. Now this was a little tricky because the helmets are shaped in a way that most of the helmet's going to be highlighted. But there's going to be some weird crevices, like on the crest. There's like a negative curve. There's going to be some shadows in there. But the helmets are they're placed on the model in such a way that it's kind of cramped, and so the smallest dry brush I had couldn't really get into all of it. So I had to supplement it with some other brushes. Sometimes the occasional layer paint. So it was kind of a combination, right? Primarily using the dry brush to establish that highlight, but supplemented with layer painting, the occasional attempt at blending, just to pick out some of those details and correct some of the imperfections that are inevitable for this kind of model. Once that was all done, I went in and hit some of the details. There was a couple of grenades. There was some yellow on the crest of the helmets because the yellow is the color of my craft world. I believe it's Aeldari. I don't know if that's how you pronounce it, but yellow was going to be prominent somewhere on my models. And of course, you can't forget all those awesome looking Aeldari gemstones. I hit all the settings with a metallic. Well, first hit him with black for an undercoat, then with the brightest silver metallic that I have. Then I went with the white, where the gem was going to be, and then finally with some of Army Painter's speed paints, because I have that really nice transparent kind of, I don't know, there's something different about them. I like using them for like gems and lights, like lenses on helmets, that kind of thing. I don't use them a lot because they're still touchy. I'm still using the first edition. But where they excel, they excel. As is customary for me in the detailing phase, I don't pick out a ton of details. I pick out the important ones. I think the things that I think gives it a nice pop, a nice sizzle, and that won't detract from the overall look of the model, because let's face it, I am not very skilled, and every additional detail I add has the potential to negatively impact my result. So I have to be careful here. So aside from the aforementioned details like the gems and things like that, I also pick out, there's a couple of little like armbands. I make those white. The Exarch, the sergeant of the squad, has like a couple of other like straps, so I hit those as well. There's a couple of Dire Avengers symbols. I picked those out with metallic silver as well, and that's pretty much it. It's a wrap with the details. As is also customary for me, I finish off the Dire Avengers with a nice thin coat of matte acrylic varnish to make sure that the models can stand up to the rigors of time. I go in and highlight the gems and the eye glowy things with some gloss varnish. And you can't forget a few grass tufts on the base. The extra splash of color really makes them pop. I even went one more step beyond, something that I haven't tried in absolute decades. I added just a few of these decals for the transfer sheets. I picked out a couple of Dire Avengers symbols. I picked out the, the Assyrian craft world for the Exarch's banner, and my dudes are done. They don't look half bad. Yes, I could have done better, probably, but it would have taken a lot more time, and this is kind of right up there at the kind of limits of my current ability, and sometimes you've got to be happy with what you can do. Yes, absolutely strive to do better in the next project, but, this kind of thing is incremental, and, take your victories where you can get them. And this, I'm happy calling it a victory. It's not perfect, there's a few mistakes. If we look at this Exarch, he's a cool looking model, but you see his loincloth there. There's a transfer sheet that went wrong. I don't have a lot of experience with transfer sheets, and so there's a little flame from the Assyrian symbol. It was supposed to be kind of off to the side, but it's not quite where I wanted it to go. Once it kind of dried, there was just no amount of extra moisture. There was no amount of pushing and prodding that would make that darn thing move. After a few minutes, I just decided, you know what? That's where it lives. Lesson learned. You gotta be more careful. You also notice that the Assyrian symbol, it's white on white. Not a great move. Well, I didn't plan on putting the transfer sheets on, and so once I finished the model, I thought, you know what? Let's go ahead and do that. And the transfer sheet was a white color, and I could have gone back and just repainted the flag, but I was in too deep. I would have to change the entire thing, and then what color was I going to pick? I would have had to have picked blue, but there's already a lot of blue on this model. If I had picked white, well, I did pick white, and that's what happened. I could have maybe picked yellow for the craft world, but there's a yellow symbol of flame in there as well. The only other alternative was to printing my own custom transfer sheets, and man, I am not there yet. It doesn't look very hard, but there's some Photoshop skills and there's some digital manipulation that I would have to do. I'm just not up for the task. I took it. Next time, I'll do better. Now, overall, I'm pretty happy with these models. My paint job, it was okay. But these models, well, they're older. Not quite as old as my original batch, but they're older, and the kit, you can kind of see its age. There's a couple of issues with the kit that I wish wouldn't happen. And so kind of my biggest issue with the kit is this accessory kit, this tool kit. Some of them fit better than others, and it's just kind of muddled. The details on these models kind of overall, they're not very sharp. So after a few coats, right, you've got your base coat, you've got maybe a layer, maybe you've got a couple of dry brush passes, and every pass kind of starts noticeably making the details more and more shallow, and it really shows in these accessory kits. And some of them are particularly bad, so you'll notice how the kit just kind of sits there. It isn't really blended into the model, with texture. It just kind of sits there. So you kind of have to be happy with the way it just magically adheres to the person's back. That's weird. And they're all a little different. Some of them are a little better, but they're all just kind of dissatisfying or unsatisfying. Yeah, that's a better word for it. But there's no sense in focusing on the negatives. There's lots to like about these models. They are pretty cool. They're very Aeldari, and I really like them. I'm going to go ahead and just point out another mistake that I made that I tried to correct and I just couldn't fix it all the way, you'll notice how this Guardian has a bit of a tinge of pink on his helmet. That wasn't supposed to be there. It was supposed to be a white helmet, but as I went in, I added the speed paint to the lenses. Again, I'm using version 1 because I don't want to buy version 2, although it's probably a lot better. But it ran a little bit into the white helmet, and once the speed paint gets into your other surfaces, there's just no getting rid of it. It eats through any surface that's underneath and any surface that's above. It's a lot of trouble, but I like the way it looks. There's just something about that red or the greens that I cannot replicate that with normal acrylics. So I take the cost of the speed paints, the trouble that it causes when it causes it, minimize it wherever possible, but it's an exchange, right? And so I accept the cost because the outcome looks the way it does. Now then, if you don't have any Aeldar, if you don't have these models specifically, you might be wondering, well, what's so special about them? Are they different? I mean, they kind of just look like Guardians. Honestly, they really do. But do they really? And so this is one of those cases where you want to give them a side-by-side comparison. Here is my Dire Avenger, and here is my Aeldari Guardian. These are kind of the more modern kits that I can get in either one of them. This is fairly recent. It's, I think, published within the last year. This has been around for a bunch of years, I think. But you can kind of see, right, there's absolutely similarities. There's kind of an alien bug thing happening with them, but they're still humanoid. They're not like Tyranidy. But you can kind of see that the Dire Avenger, he's beefier. The Guardian is thinner and more lithe. Even the weapon feels thinner on the Guardian than it does on the Dire Avenger. It's a really cool little detail. They're really, really similar, but they're different enough. Oh, look, there's no veins. So the Guardians have these little veins. The Dire Avengers don't. They have this targeting computer thing, which I think gives them that advantage in Overwatch. So they're very, very similar, but they're also distinct enough that I think they complement each other very, very well, but they're still distinct enough that you can field them both in Battlefield and feel really good about them. And I think even the Dire Avenger is a little taller, not by a ton. It's just different enough that, man, I like the impact. And I cannot wait for a resculpt of these because, yeah, these are old. They need a resculpt. They need some love. They need some attention. Whenever they come out, I'm buying them and painting them because they can only be better than these. And these were not too bad. But the real comparison that I've been dying to make was with my original Dire Avengers from way back in 2nd edition. I used to love these models, and I'm curious to see how they stack up. Let's take a look. Here are my Dire Avenger buddies from way back in the day, and you know, I'm kind of digging their paint scheme. It's kind of out there, but it's a gray bodysuit with golden armor plates and this bright orange helmet with a blue crest. Why? I don't know. I just thought it looked cool. And that, of course, is the best reason to do anything in Warhammer 40k. You even see the old school basing. Yeah, that was the pinnacle of basing, so far as I knew way back in the day. There's the booty shot. You can kind of see all the accessories on the belts. These were really, really cool for their time, and I was really proud of my painting skills back then. I kid you not, I was convinced, probably irrationally so, but I was convinced that I was one of the best painters in my circle of nerds. Given what's happened in the past 20 years with the explosion of the internet and everyone and their dogs making content for the internet, I know for a fact I'm not a very good painter now, but I have a much wider universe to compare myself against, which means I have a lot of examples of how I can improve. But back then, I had a small circle of friends that I thought was huge, but there was maybe 12 people I knew that played Warhammer 40k, and that was the entire universe of people that played Warhammer 40k. You know, it's very easy to be among the best of 12 people. It's really hard to be among the best of one of millions of people. So if you're not the best painter in Warhammer 40k, you're in fantastic company. So let's take a look at these guys side by side, and man, yeah, you can see some differences. Not just in the detail, not just in the posing, not just in the variety of posing that the new models have, but these guys are very compact. There's kind of one piece. It's a metal model, and there's not a whole lot of variation, because I guess variation back then was expensive, particularly with metal. The details are pretty flat. And I made sure to pick out every single gemstone, because I thought that's what you were supposed to do with Eldar. Now, you don't pick out every single gemstone. They're all just parts of the armor. But you can kind of see, right? The new Aeladri Guardian, the new Dire Avengers are a little taller. They're a little wider. There's, somehow they're they're more lithe, but they're also more formidable. I don't know, they're like more muscular or something. I don't know how to describe it. There's something special about these. The guns are way more impressive too. Look at the length of the barrel of these shuriken catapults versus the old ones here. But you can see the similarities. You can see where this guy was inspired by something like this guy. All in all, I'm really happy with the addition to my collection of Dire Avengers. Even my old guys, I'm pretty happy with them. They were the best I could do at the time, and it wasn't too shabby. I like to think I've done a bit better than I did back then. You're gonna look so nice on my shelf. I can't wait. Hey, so that's all I've got for this one. I really enjoyed my project. I want to have a special shout out, a special thank you to the wonderful lady whose name I totally forgot, who helped me out at Toy Soldiers in Dallas, Texas. I had a great time visiting that store, even though it was way further away than I expected. And I even found these Vallejo color acrylic paints right on the shelf. I'd never seen a Vallejo on any shelf. But there they were, along with a bunch of other paints I'd never even heard of. I am looking forward to going back to Toy Soldier next time I'm in Dallas. That's it. That's my story. I hope I was a little entertaining, and I hope you picked up a little something. If nothing else, you learned maybe an appreciation for these old Eldar models. And if you're curious how this guy still looks as good, there's no chips, there's no scratches, there's no disfiguring of the paint. How did this happen after 20 years? I was only a little careful in their storage, but not very careful. You know how they survived? With chemicals like these. This is why I swear by the matte varnish on my minis, all of my minis, because my old minis had these, kind of the later batches of them, when I discovered that matte varnish was a thing, and there's not a ding on them. Those models that I didn't varnish, they didn't fare so well. Thank you very much for watching. This has been Your Average Bear Gaming. I've also been George. Have a wonderful afternoon. Be nice to yourselves and each other. Peace.